Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the elephant in the room as we age. Loneliness, especially for us Gen Xers and expats who decided to pack up and reinvent our lives on our own terms. We spent so much time running, striving, and trying to escape the noise. But what happens when the noise stops and we are left alone in a quiet room or in a foreign country? Maybe you would like to travel but don't want to be alone or don't want to go on an adventure by yourself. Maybe you're afraid of getting lonely. Today I'm going to share the ultimate life hack for the solo traveler. How to escape fearing the isolation and actually become your own best friend and traveling companion. I call it pirate therapy. And by the end of this video, you will have the map to raid your own inner world and claim your peace. The other day, I was scrolling through the comments on a YouTube channel for retirees and expats, standard procedure for me. I noticed a comment from a woman who said she desperately wanted more adventure, more travel, more life. But being single, she was afraid of going alone or of being alone. It slapped me in the face. She was so sincere and real. I replied to her and I said, you need to cultivate a friendship with yourself and become your own best friend and traveling companion. She wrote back, how exactly do I do that? And that is a fair question. So I've been looking back at my own trajectory over the last few years, tracing exactly how I went from a broken, angry relationship with myself to an enjoyable traveling companion and best friend. And today I'm answering her and I'm answering you. I've come by the answer honestly. I made a lot of mistakes and I spent a lot of money to learn this answer. So hang in there with me. If you're new here, I'm Island Punk. Welcome to GenX-Xpat. I retired at 58 after the political circus of the 2024 election. I packed a bag and moved from the Alaskan wilderness to a small island in the Indian Ocean. I moved alone, I live alone, and I am never lonely. My life is incredibly simple, but I am rich with experiences. To all of you out there thinking that you would love to do this or that if you had someone to go with, you would. Well, you do have someone. It's you. That's what I'm going to talk about today. But look, I haven't always been this way. I used to be a nightmare to myself, demanding, choked by anxiety, and wired with fear. So let's rewind to 2017. I'm going to tell you a short story. Hang in there with me. The first time the political landscape fractured. I was living in Oregon, freshly divorced after nearly 20 years of marriage. I had thrown every last dime of my divorce settlement into renovating a condo. Talk about a distraction. I was co-teaching in middle school with this co-teacher who had been in her position for 15 years and who bragged about having no colleague that had ever failed to disappoint her, and boy, did I annoy her. She told me my face annoyed her. I told her it wasn't on purpose. After the election, she was furious that I wasn't angry enough about the state of the world. She asked me if I could remember anything politically as bad as what had happened at that moment. And I gave her a sincere, classic, unfiltered Gen X answer. I said, well, Princess Diana getting killed was really awful for the world. I mean, don't you think? She was so mad. She called me a mouth breathing imbecile and demanded I leave the room. Look, I genuinely thought that the world lost a beautiful light when Diana died. But the truth was, I wasn't invested in political theater. I had my own house fire going on at the time. And the day after I finally moved into that newly remodeled condo, the universe dropped the hammer. The vice principal called me in and told me my teaching contract wasn't being renewed. No union protection because I was in my first 2 years. I had excellent reviews, but that didn't matter. They can fire you for looking at them sideways. They don't have to give a reason. I was devastated. But worse than that, I was ashamed. It triggered every childhood trauma of being afraid and lonely and ashamed. I felt unworthy of the teaching profession. I had no advocacy for myself. But there's a good reason for that, and I'm going to tell you about that in just a minute, so hang in there. So I did what every self-respecting Gen Xer does. They reinvent the wheel or reinvent themselves. I sold the condo, lost almost all the money I put into it, and at age 47, went online and enrolled in a master's in clinical mental health, where I spent the next 3 years volunteering at mental health centers, renting with roommates, and barely getting by, living on student loans and credit cards. There's a happy ending here. Getting through a mental health program forces you to look under your own hood. You learn your own operating system, so to speak, and I realized I was carrying a mountain of internalized shame. And I was the family scapegoat, hypervigilant, always waiting for the next blow. And my coping mechanisms? External metrics. I measured a good day by how many items I crossed off my checklist. I measured my worth by my bank account. I measured my value by my appearance, my weight, my diet, the amount of time I spent at the gym. It added up to a D or a C minus on most days, how I felt about myself. See, I was right at the finish line of that degree when COVID hit, and boom, the internship that I went to Alaska for was paused, and I was out of money. I had to swallow my pride and go back to teaching without having accomplished my goal. But this time, though, something was fundamentally different. I had discovered how to care about myself regardless of whether I was performing well. And that's when pirate therapy was born. I didn't get the degree, but I paid for the information, and I was not going to let it go to waste. I stole the best, most accessible tools from clinical therapy, turning them inward and hacking my own thinking, my own internal dialogue, and my relationship with myself. I stopped looking for external validation. I started talking to myself like a friend. I learned how to parent myself when I was terrified. I started laughing kindly at my mistakes instead of beating myself up. There's a concept I write about on my Substack that forms the backbone of this philosophy. Radical acceptance means yes to the whole of your experience. It's a mix of Tara Brach's mindfulness and Carl Rogers' unconditional positive regard. It means embracing the shiny, polished parts of yourself, but also the messy, conflicted, ugly parts. Our brains are wired to reject discomfort. And when we journal, we notice these squeaky little thoughts like, I don't want to feel like this, or I'm not going to give in to this feeling. I'm not going to let it happen. But radical acceptance isn't about giving in or giving up. It's about acknowledging what is right now without judgment. It's stopping the fist fight with your own anxiety and loneliness and saying, okay, you're here. Let's take a deep breath and deal with it. It's letting the sadness rise, taking a breath and whispering, this also belongs. When you do that, the emotion moves through you instead of defining you. When you stop editing your own inner voice, you realize you aren't too much, you aren't too late, you aren't less than, you are whole right now. And honestly, being your friend is a privilege not everyone should have. When I moved to Alaska alone in 2019, I was still a little bit of a wreck. Well, maybe more than a little bit, but I'd had this hard-won wisdom of poor choices and the skeletal keys of a friendship with myself. I stopped caring so much about the world judging me and started focusing on whether my actions were in alignment with my values. And sure, there were mistakes. Cultivating bad habits like alcohol takes time and real effort. But even in that mess, I kept showing up for myself. I spoke to myself with honesty and compassion. So by 2022, it was time for a stress test. I took a 6,000-mile solo trip from Alaska to Oregon and back in my truck to buy a camper. I expected it to be boring. I expected to be lonely and afraid. But I wasn't. Sleeping alone in the cab of a truck in the middle of nowhere is, yes, unsettling at first. But by the time I pulled back into Alaska, I had forged a solid, trusting relationship with myself. I could travel alone for a month and enjoy myself. I remember when I got back visiting with a family friend at a barbecue, a cousin, she told me she would never go on a trip like that because she would be so lonely without her husband. And that was my aha moment. I had expected to be lonely, bored. I find it difficult. But in fact, it was empowering. Maybe that kind of thinking is part of the problem. There just aren't enough people, women in particular, who speak up and say that it doesn't have to be that way. Am I wrong, or don't men live and enjoy life single all the time and talk about it? All right, cut to today. Living the island life as a retiree in a foreign country has its own wild ups and downs. The fears don't completely vanish. Accidents, healthcare, navigating a new culture alone. But the partner I brought with me, myself, has been tested and proven and is entirely dependable to show up in an emergency with great observations and discernment. So I would say to anyone who wants to travel in retirement but has been held back by being alone, nurture a relationship with yourself. Respect it. Keep showing up. It's a daily work in progress. When you treat yourself as a worthy companion, solitude stops being about being alone and starts being about being accompanied by someone you trust. If this resonates with you, I dive deep into these exact journal practices in my book, Mental Wealth Journey, which is available on Amazon. It's your companion to building this exact kind of resilience. And hit that subscribe button. Of course, it's totally free, and honestly, it keeps me going. It gives me hope for the future of this channel. If you want to subscribe to the journey, check out my Substack. It's also free, or drop a contribution in Buy Me a Coffee in the description below. Join the conversation in the comments. What part of yourself are you learning to say yes to? To all of you out there thinking that you would love to do this, or that if you had someone to go with, you probably would. Well, you do. It's you. Until next time, stay resilient, fellow pirates. Until next time, stay resilient, fellow pirates.